Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is Puneet Luthra to talk about government relations. Puneet, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Alex.
So, as we begin, I would love if you could share with our listeners what is your superhero origin story?
My superhero origin story. Well, I'm a superhero government relations professional, and I like the term superhero because I've often said that I am a good lobbyist. I am a good government relations professional. And what I mean by that is I've chosen to support the nonprofit sector exclusively with government relations services so that they can influence policy, public policy, and secure government funding and build the relationships that they need to build with government to help them make the changes that they're focused on making, whether it's solving homelessness or indigenous issues as it comes to education, health related issues. So that's my background as a superhero, if you will.
And what was the motivation to get into this? Like, how did your career get to the point where you said, this is really what I want to be, how I want to be spending my time?
Yeah, that's a good question. It actually started from the very beginning of my career. But before that, my mother was in the nonprofit sector her entire career as a social worker, as a caseworker with women who lived through domestic violence, and I saw her doing some very good work, some very much needed work, and so that stuck with me as in terms of what I wanted my career to be. And I knew that for me to be successful, I needed a career that was focused on something that I could be motivated by, and helping people, helping causes like my mom did is what I chose to do. And in fact, someone told me from the very beginning when I asked them, I said, what do you think about me getting a job or taking a job as a government relations manager for, and I'll name them, Big Brothers, Big Sisters of Canada. And they said, well, if you want to be in GR and you take a job in the nonprofit sector, you will always be in the nonprofit sector. The private sector probably, won't look at your resume. And in fact, that's what happened. So the guy who gave me that advice was spot on, and it scared me at the beginning, but then it turned out I realized that's exactly what I wanted. I'm taking this chance to build a career in the nonprofit sector, and that was over almost 20 years ago now, taking that job. And I've only ever done government relations in the nonprofit charitable sector. And I'm glad I took that job at Big Brothers, Big Sisters.
My father actually was a big brother many,
Mhm.
many years ago. So I had
Yeah,
a bit of exposure to the organization then, and it's a wonderful one. So
yeah.
happy to hear that. You mentioned Canada, of course. We're both in Canada. The government relations, as you do it, is it only in Canada? Do you advise nonprofits in the U.S. as well, or other countries, or do you stay within Canada?
Yeah, so how I answer that is I often say that I do national government relations. So it's a federal level of government in Canada as well as all of the provinces. So my clients have interests at the federal level as well as in several provinces. Some of them have interests in all provinces. Some of them want to target certain jurisdictions. But I do national government relations in Canada. I don't have the time, nor actually, I don't think the expertise to work in a place like the U.S. Doing government relations. And I'm not too sure, to be honest with you, if I would want to at this point. So I focus on Canadian government relations.
I know we've got quite a few listeners in the US, so would you say that the conversation today would be still mostly applicable to them if they wanted to start doing something in the US, or is it black and white? Like how different, as far as you know, the building a government relations network and connecting to your local government or your national government or your state government in the US, how much does it differ from the Canadian side?
Yeah, so I think there is I remember actually speaking with someone in the US about government relations, and one of the areas that I work on is government funding. And in Canada, a lot of charities, nonprofits seek out funding from government for their programs and services. In the US, there's a different take on it from what I've seen, is that they don't want to be engaging with government for funding. They feel as though it ties their hands, and to some degree, that's true. But I think what we're seeing in the U.S. right now makes it extremely important for nonprofits and charitable organizations in the US to really, really consider how they're going to communicate with their state and federal government. It is extremely divided in America right now. And it is, I would say, not to the same degree, but it is divided in Canada as well. But to answer your question, I would say it's extremely important that people start trying to figure out in the US how they can create coalitions, how they can create their messaging, how they can work together to address some of the issues that, could be a little bit scary for many in the nonprofit sector in the US.
That makes sense. I just want to make sure that we don't alienate, most of our listeners through the conversation, but that the practical advice we're trying to give or the conversation we're going to have today is, it is obviously local and specific to Canada, but it doesn't mean to say that it's completely disconnected from any government relations. It's the idea of building relationships at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what it is. I mean, I joke a little bit about the US and the difference between that and Canada, but it's also because my wife is American. So I hear the news all the time, the politics, the frustrations. But I do want to say that it's extremely important right now for the US for nonprofits in the US to really take a look to see how they can work together, how they can work with this new administration. I mean, you don't really have much of a choice other than to say that we need to work with them at some level, right? And so how do you do that at the same time as representing your cause as well as you can be?
I love starting conversations at a high level, more theory type of stuff, and then working our way down to more actionable advice. So I was wondering for people just who are not maybe so familiar with the concept or the term government relations, what do you mean when you say, you know, having a relationship with the government, or, how do you explain what you do to a child, for example, who doesn't quite understand, what you do?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you asked that because my wife and my daughter don't really understand what I do for a living. So, but to answer your question, so like, what's sort of the definition, my working definition of government relations? There's a few pieces there, right? So the relationship part is definitely key, right? You have to establish relationships not only with politicians, but with the bureaucrats as well, right? And so how do you do that? How do you establish a relationship with anyone? Well, how does anyone establish a relationship with anyone? They educate them on what their positions are, what motivates them from a policy perspective, what it is that they would like to see changed in the world. So educating politicians and bureaucrats about the work that your organization does is a key part in building those relationships. The other part is, how does your work actually relate to the work of the government? So, are you doing work that's in line with, for example, the minister's mandate letters or the government's recent budget or the speech from the throne? How does your work fit into all of that? And how can you offer the government to help them meet those same goals, right? It's government relations isn't about asking government for anything. It's about offering to help meet a particular policy objective. And so when I work with my clients, I always say, government relations consultants will say, they'll pound on this idea that you need to have an ask. What's your ask? How much are you asking for? And that's true to some degree, but I always tell my clients, okay, what's the ask? But what are you offering? Why should they listen to you, right? Just because you think you need $1 million to deliver your programming doesn't mean they think that. What they may agree with, however, if you tell them, is why that $1 million in government funding can get 100 people jobs, or 100 people out of homelessness, or giving someone else a second chance at an education, right? So it's not about the ask of government always, it's what you can offer to government. And that in large part comes from your work on the ground as a nonprofit, right? And you have to tell them that this is what we've seen works, and this is what we've seen does not work. So government relations is about building relationships, but it's also about offering your nonprofit's expertise to the government to solve a problem that could be a shared objective.
That's a great definition. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Mm.
And I also agree that I mean, in every relationship, you actually want to offer something first before you ask for something, right? You want to leverage that reciprocity rule, because you might have motives to ask something down the road, and hopefully you do, because you do want to have a give and take. But the idea is by starting with something, by offering and trying to figure out how to align your message to what they're trying to achieve and say, look, we can achieve this together kind of thing by combining forces, seems to be a really good way of starting that conversation.
Yeah, yeah, and my issue with many of the large sort of consulting firms is that they'll focus on that part, the ask, right? And it's not at all about the ask. Even politicians sometimes find themselves in that trap as well. I've been in meetings where the politician across the table at the end of the meeting has said, so you're not asking for anything from us? And at that point, you feel as though, oh, well, maybe we should have come in with an ask. But I do believe that offering your assistance, offering your expertise is the way to go. And yes, you're right. It's to offer a hand is much better, I think, and um, it's much better to do it that way than to come in with an ask right off the bat. And it's just something that I believe in personally, but also professionally. I've seen this works better.
I'm curious about the logistics of actually reaching out to a politician or to a government. I mean, is it something that a nonprofit would typically, like if you're working with a nonprofit, you're the one that's doing that, you know who to reach out to and you may have their contact information. But if a nonprofit doesn't have your expertise, like is it a matter of, and I don't even know the answer to this, but do they look up at a phone book? Like how do they start the initial conversation to say, hey, we would love to sit down and tell you a bit more about our organization and what we do, and see if there is an alignment and how we can offer our services or our help and so forth?
It's a good question, and it shouldn't be a question that people are embarrassed by, because I do notice that many people are embarrassed, and when they say, well, I don't even, is there a website? Like,
Mm.
where do I even go? And my answer to them is government relations is not rocket science, right? Like there are, first of all, to answer the question, yes, there are websites which list every single politician and bureaucrat's name pretty much across Canada, right? So there are provincial websites and federal websites. But to give some better advice other than go and look at this website to figure out who you need to talk to, I would say to them, start with your local politician. Reach out to your local politician, whether that's your local city councillor, your local MPP if you're in Ontario, an MLA if you're in a different province. So the MPP is your member of provincial parliament. Your MLA would be similar, but it's called a member of legislative assembly in other provinces. And then the third local politician would be your MP. So your first question is, before you reach out to these individuals, is where does my issue live? So where does my issue live? So if you are a nonprofit focused on healthcare, well, your issue lives at the provincial level because provinces deliver healthcare. The federal government provides the funding, but who delivers it? It's the province. So you're going to want to reach out to your MPP or your MLA. If you're working on immigration issues and issues affecting refugees and newcomers, then you're going to want to take it up again with the province, but to some degree also the federal government, right? So you have to figure out where your issue lives. And then my rule would be to start with your local politician, again, whether that's at the municipal, provincial, or federal level, as long as you know that you're confident that your issue lives within that jurisdiction. Once that happens, I find that most politicians are very open to providing further introductions. So, an MPP may say, "Well, this is important enough that I can introduce you to the minister, and maybe get a meeting there, right?" So there are ways to start, and I tell people, if you know people in government, start with them. But if you don't, if you're just literally brand new, trying to figure out who to contact your local politician and explain why it is that you're contacting them.
I'm actually really happy to hear that that people seem to be open to having these kinds of conversations. It's not like, why are you bothering me type of response, it sounds like.
And
Is
that
that
is something that many people think that they are bothering their politicians. Guess what? Bother your politicians. But we need more of that. Right now, we need more of that. Bother your politicians, but do it in a professional way and don't do it in a partisan way. Don't go up to a liberal politician and start complaining about how they've ruined the world and that we need more conservative or NDP politicians. That's not going to help you. But going to them with data, with information, and with solutions is not going to be bothering them in any way. They want success just as much as you want it. But it depends on what their priorities as a government are.
there's a certain mindset maybe that the nonprofit can take, and that is understanding that the purpose of politicians is to help the people, right? And if your nonprofit is also helping the people, your goals are aligned, they should be inclined to help and be interested in at least hearing more about you. So
Yeah.
if you take that mindset, maybe that is a good way to start the conversation, as opposed to, well, they're probably busy doing their own thing and I got my thing and I'll try, but I'm not so sure. And, it's awkward. But no, to realize that you're all trying to get to the same place, maybe different strategies to get there, but at least that will kind of make a connection or connect the two of you in purpose.
Yeah, exactly. And I would encourage nonprofits to stop thinking that way, that that they could be bothering the no you know you pay them,
Mm.
you pay them, and they should be listening to you. Now, getting meetings with politicians and ministers, it's not the easiest thing to do, but if you start at the local level and you start in a nonpartisan way and you start with offering solutions, then you get off on the right foot, right? You don't, and then from that point on, it becomes quite easy, quite easy.
Is there any comparison to trying to reach out to high net worth individuals, in the sense that I know that some organizations, they're looking for major donors, they try contacting people who they believe would be a good fit. Again, also making sure that their values are aligned. But the 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 concept of approaching someone who is in demand in the high net worth individual, would you say it's parallel to government relations, or it's a really different bag entirely because they're there to serve, because they're there? You said we've hired them. Like it's a different kind of mindset or context.
That's an interesting question. I'm always hesitant to talk of, or to answer questions like that, just because I know a ton of nonprofit fundraisers who tell me a lot about approaching high net worth individuals for major gifts, things like that, and that's something I've never worked on. And I'll be quite honest with you, I would be more intimidated about doing that than approaching the Premier of Ontario or the Prime Minister of Canada or their chiefs of staff. I would be a little bit more intimidated. And I should be clear, though, I wouldn't be intimidated because of who they are. I would be intimidated because I would feel as though, and many fundraisers will argue or disagree with this, but I would feel as though I was going to someone with more of an ask rather than an offer. And that's how much I believe that you need to be going with both. Now, nonprofit fundraisers would say, well, no, my approach is to go to this high net worth individual and explain to him or her that what I'm offering them is a chance to make a difference. Sure, okay, fine, I get that part, but um, I think it's a bit, I just find it a bit easier, and maybe it's because I've only ever worked with government and politicians my whole career. I just find it a bit easier to get a conversation started with a politician as opposed to a high net worth individual. Now, I've never even tried approaching a high net worth individual because that's not my job. But that would be my take on it, right? Is that it seems a bit more like an ask as opposed to an offer and an ask.
And I draw parallels because the way that I initially thought about it, and I'm still thinking about it, is that these are people who are in demand, right? It's not just a regular, average person on the street who has got a certain amount of money to give to a charity. These are people who, on a regular basis, get approached for various things, and therefore they're maybe cautionary because they get approached so often, and sometimes maybe by crazy ideas, sometimes by great ideas, and they have to go through some kind of filtering process. So I see that similarity between the two, and that's why I asked the question.
Yeah, and and you're right though, because on both sides, the high net worth person or the politician, they have to figure out what their response is going to be based on their priorities, right? And so, if you can appeal to their priorities, whether it's public policy or a philanthropic priority, then you're in a good spot, I think. But yes, they all will base their responses on their own priorities. If you can somehow figure, and with government, that's easy to do. It's all public information,
Right.
right? With high net worth individuals, all you see is them um, associated with a brand or a cause, but you don't exactly know what their other priorities are. With government, it's quite clear: mandate letters, budget documents, speeches, all that.
Let's shift the conversation to the why. And you talked a bit about at the beginning about why we'd want to reach out, or not necessarily the why, but you talked about some of the benefits of reaching out to the government for building relations. But I'm curious to know a bit more about the why. Like, is there is it a limitation of a nonprofit to say, like, we can only get so far on our own? We need to collaborate with the government, or what other benefits are
Mm.
there and motivations or indicators that a nonprofit should say, you know what, we need help here, and this is the direction we need to go into by going toward the government side. Like, what would be
Yeah.
there's, I guess, I have two questions: the why and the criteria, or the triggers to realize that this is the right direction to go. But let's start with the why first. Like, what are the benefits basically of having a government relationship?
Yeah, so I would say the benefits would include having that opportunity to influence public policy around the issues that you care about, right? And so the motivation comes from, you being involved with your nonprofit, involved in seeing what's happening at the grassroots level, and saying to yourself, okay, so we cannot do this and like you said, we cannot do this ourselves. We're seeing what government's doing and they're not doing it correctly. So I think it's time that we need to have a conversation about how we can work together with government to meet their priorities, to meet their objectives, right? So most of my clients throughout my career have always said to me, we always knew we needed to engage with government, but we just didn't know how. And that's how I was hired, right? But I would say that the motivation comes from, frustration at seeing public policy issues not solved that we're seeing today that we've been addressing 20 years ago when I started, right? Newcomers to Canada are facing the same issues about getting jobs as doctors and nurses. There's so many issues like that are still around. And that's why nonprofits have decided to work with government to say, look, we can help you. We know what's going on at the grassroots level. And we have the data that can help inform good public policy. So I think the short answer is what would motivate, what would be a trigger? Frustration at seeing these problems continue to persist, right? And I think that's why most people start engaging with government, or most organizations that I've worked with in the past want to engage with government.
To play devil's advocate for a second, if the frustration lasts for 20 years, is it a lost cause? Like, I know you have to keep on fighting the fight, but at what point, if there are still challenges today as there were 20 years ago, at what point do we say, well, hang on a second, maybe there isn't a solution here, or we have to fight even harder because the efforts so far haven't been successful. Maybe we need a different approach.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I was watching the Leaf game last night and I turned it off when it was 3-1 going into the third. And because I'm a diehard Leafs fan, I checked the score this morning thinking, ah, shit, 3-1. That's two in a row they've lost. I woke up to find out that they won 4-3 in overtime. And so the point there is it's easy to look away and it's easy to walk away. But if you're a nonprofit professional, you're always going to come back and you're going to keep fighting. So I'm not too concerned about anyone saying, well, I've been working on increasing or improving equity in education for Indigenous people. I've never heard anyone walk away from that. I've never heard anyone say, well, there's still racism that still exists in Ontario and in Canada and in Toronto. And I've been dealing with that. I'm 60 years old and I've been dealing with that my whole life. And I see nothing change. Well, guess what? They still go to work the next day because, I truly believe that nonprofit people, nonprofit organizations are the most resilient people on the planet. They will continue to fight, and I'm not concerned that they will ever decide not to.
I mean, I hope not. Just again, I'm trying to make sure we
Yeah.
see the
Oh,
perspective from all sides. I think
yeah.
that the reason nonprofits exist is because there is a need and people believe that they can fulfill that need. So, it might be a lifetime or multiple lifetimes to get to the desired outcome. But yeah, I mean, fighting the fight is part of the challenge, and just being there and the front lines and fighting, I think, is an important thing because that can inspire other people as well. And there's a whole
Yeah.
plethora of benefits. So,
Yeah,
but I
and
want to,
it does rub off, Alex. Sorry to cut you off, but it
yeah.
does rub off, right? My daughter sees me doing what I do, and now I see her, um, taking up causes in her own way. She's decided to boycott certain brands, and I think that's great. And so, part of the reason for fighting, continuing to fight, is exactly what you just said, right? Because it rubs off. And once you quit, that rubbing off stops. And then nobody picks up the ball, right? So It is easy to walk away. It's easy to get frustrated. It's easy, actually, these days to get completely depressed over the state of politics and the way we've decided to act. There's something in all of us that says, well, I'm still going to continue fighting. Right. And that's what I see the nonprofit sector doing. But it is easy, definitely, to get overwhelmed and decide this is it. Right.
Just to go a bit level deeper in the psychology and the philosophy of things, I think there's something beautiful and very intrinsic about human nature that needs a certain level of struggle. Like if everything is just handed to us and everything's successful from that, we could get bored really fast. I think we were built to a certain extent over time to not enjoy the struggle, but to find purpose in the struggle. And the struggle itself becomes important. And hopefully we do get the outcomes we are looking for and fighting for. But I think it just the fact that we're struggling isn't enough to stop us.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it's tough work. It's not easy. And I remember my mom in the work that she did as working with women who lived through domestic violence. I remember the stress she would come home with. I remember her reading the newspapers when we actually used to have newspapers to read. She would open the newspaper on a Saturday morning, and there would be a horrible news story about a South Asian woman who was murdered by her husband, for example. And that's a real example, to be honest. And the stress of having to deal with that on the weekend. But guess what? On Monday, she went right back to the same place, right? And she continued to fight for those women and for those families. So I think you and I both agree that, yeah, it's easy to get turned away. I've worked in issues around Indigenous education, around racism, around newcomers, and it's completely frustrating and depressing sometimes. But guess what? I know what the end could look like. And we all know what the end could look like, right? That's why we keep pushing.
Continuing a bit more on that the devil's advocate side of things, and I do that just because I like to again tackle it from multiple sides. Are there any reasons why a nonprofit should not reach out to a government organization that again is aligned with their mission, but feeling that they can do it on their own? I'm going to answer my own question to a certain extent. We're talking about for a moment immigration. I'm pretty sure a nonprofit themselves couldn't influence policy to themselves without having some kind of government relations. But is there any reason, another reason why a nonprofit should maybe decide not to go toward building government relations, or a hesitancy, or I don't know, some other element that would prevent them or make them question whether they should?
Yeah. So I mean, the only time I would tell an organization, yeah, I don't think you should even bother, is if I know that they're going to go in with, a policy perspective or a policy suggestion that is completely counter to what the government wants or for what anyone wants, that, or I would say to a nonprofit that is highly, highly partisan, you can do what you want, but it's not going to help you. It may help you in the short term, but guess what? When government switches, and they always do, they will remember, right? So if you want to take that chance and be highly partisan and slam the opposition parties and slam everyone else other than the people that you know and that you have relationships with and that you want to be buddy buddy with, you can do that. But that's where I would say, I'm out and you're on your own, right? So, so that's another way of saying there's really no good reason to not engage in government relations, right? Who is going to go and be overly partisan? There are groups that do that, right? And there's actually national nonprofit groups that are highly partisan and slam the government just because they're not the government that they support personally. And those types of organizations, I don't see a whole lot of success in terms of influencing public policy. So, yeah, if you want to do it that way, go ahead, but your success is going to be limited.
That makes total sense. Yep. Thank you
Yeah.
for sharing that.
Mm,
We talked a bit about starting with an offer rather than an ask,
mm.
and reaching out to local versus federal, or working your way up. Any other strategies that you find are particularly useful in building those kinds of relationships? Like, is there a certain formula where you offer multiple things, or you give kinds of information, and then at this moment you will then start asking for things, or any kind of strategies that you generally find yourself to be very successful in building government relations?
Yeah, so the best strategy is to have a government relations strategy, right? You really, well, a long time ago, I used to be extremely intimidated by that word. And I'm not even joking, strategy. I didn't know what it meant. I had no idea what it meant. And the what I mean by that is, it was something to be put on paper. Was it, what is a government relations strategy? It was too abstract. But then I realized what a strategy to me means. And I'll tell you what I think that means. So, a strategy means understanding what you've seen on the ground as a nonprofit, right? What you've seen works and what doesn't work, and then documenting that. And then documenting that with data and evidence. And then saying, okay, so we've got the data, the evidence, now what? Who the hell do we take this to? Well, now you start figuring out where does your issue live, like I said before, right? Then you say, okay, which ministry? Okay, so there's three ministries. You've got three ministers. Those are your target. Those are your targets, right? So all of this to say that your strategy has to be informed from the perspective of what are you going to say, who are you going to say it to, and how are you going to say it? So in which forums are you going to deliver that message, right? So your strategy has to include a targeted list of politicians and bureaucrats. Your strategy has to include your talking points and your messages for those same people. Your strategy has to include how are you going to um, leverage the government apparatus as it is to communicate your message. So, what I mean by that is every year, the provincial and federal governments have pre-budget consultations where nonprofits can go in with that evidence and say, here's our solution. So you need a strategy to say, who are you going to talk to? What are you going to say? And where are you going to say? And once you have that strategy, then you're no longer lost in the woods, like, looking around, like, where do I begin? You know where to begin, you know what to say, and you know how to say it, right? And then beyond that, can you bring others along with you? Can you bring other nonprofits with you? Can you bring EDs from other nonprofits with you to a meeting with the minister to make your case stronger? Right. So at least have some sort of strategy in place that guides you where you're going. Pick a few key issues every year that you want to focus on, or pick one issue that might take you 5 years to work on, right? But pick your issues, decide on your messaging, gather the data, and target the people that you want to target and build a coalition. And then you've got the makings of what I would say is pretty good strategy.
In terms of actual communication, do you find typically emails to be working? Or are you, in email, are you trying to drive toward a physical in-person meeting or virtual meetings? And then if you do get that meeting, like I said, follow up by email again. Are there any particular channels that work better than others? I imagine social media, for example, is not a really good channel to communicate to
Yeah.
AM government. But I mean, is there a progress or an evolution of where you should start and where you hope to end up in terms of the channels you're using to communicate?
Yeah, in terms of the channels, I mean, we've gone through this whole virtual stuff for a few years now, and I find that has made it difficult to secure meetings with government because on the other side, it's as simple as simply not responding to your meeting request, right? Because they have so many coming in now. Honestly, I think the best way to engage with government and to secure those meetings and to develop the relationship is to do things in person. There's it's too easy for me as a consultant, and I got caught up in this too for a little while. Oh, I'm working from home. I don't need to go anywhere. I don't need to go to Queen's Park and look for parking all the time. I could just email all of my materials to the targeted politicians. And guess what? Well, no one's responding. It's because everyone's doing that, right? And so you need to go out to in-person events. One of the things that I'm working on for one client right now is three provincial legislative days. So advocacy days at the legislature in three different provinces, because we believe that if we see them in person, you connect a bit better than by email. Social media, I don't know, maybe I'm too old, but social media I don't use in any way for my clients, because social media is more to get something out there rather than a response, right? I need a response from the people I'm targeting. I don't need them to just see our social media activity. We need them to respond. And I think social media is okay for that, but I think in person is best.
Makes total sense.
Mm.
And we also kind of touched upon this next question, but I'm curious to know, when would it be a good idea for a nonprofit to realize that they need help, that they can't, or they're either struggling with building a plan or a strategy, or struggling with making contact, or
Mm.
making contact but not building a relationship? When would it be a good idea and a realization to say, you know what, we need external help. We need help from an individual like yourself that has the experience that comes to the table and can get us where we need to be?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, because the times at which that realization happens are completely different. At one time, it could be because of what I said before, that there's some sort of realization that our nonprofit is not engaging with government while other nonprofits are, and they're getting either funding or they're having success in influencing policy. And so there, for many of my clients throughout my career, the thing that they said was, we realized we haven't been doing it enough, and that they should be. And it's based on what they're seeing out there. Like I said, other groups getting funding, other groups influencing policy. So that's the one side that, oh, we just haven't done enough. We know it's important. Let's start doing it. And then sometimes they hire me, or they add government relations to the side of someone's desk in the nonprofit and expect them to do it. As an aside, my business is built on taking over the GR function. Even if it's for a few hours a month, I manage the GR function for them, because if you're going to do GR, the last thing I would recommend is to do it off the side of your desk. It doesn't work that way. Nothing works that way, right? But GR, for some reason, has always been done that way. And then they realize, we need someone who can manage this full time, and that's where I come along. So the other instance, which I think is really become clear to me when nonprofits realize that they need help, is when they're being really successful in the work that they're doing. And that sounds kind of strange, right? But it came up at a conference I was at on behalf of a client in Calgary last week, where I heard a man speak about the great, great work that his First Nation is doing with regard to substance abuse and mental health of Indigenous men in their community. And they were having great success. But guess what? They don't have any physical room left over to deliver these programs that are working so well. So that's when they realized, hey, maybe government can help, because we know, we can tell them that what we are doing is working. We have the evidence. We have the people who are willing to say, this helped me. But we don't have the space, and government could be a target to ask for more room, for capital funding, for a new addition to their community center where they can have more space for this type of programming. So the answer is, you might find that you need help when you're becoming really good at what you do, and you want that, you want to leverage what you've done into even greater success. So that it's kind of an interesting thing that happens. And how does government respond to that? Well, government will come out and say, well, here's some funding programs that you can apply to, and they'll focus it on organizations that have done something and want to take it to the next level. That's what we all call capacity building, right? And so there are programs like that, but you do need to prove that what you've been doing works, and now you're ready to take it to another level. That would be the second point at which nonprofits realize, oh, I think we should engage with government.
If you had a crystal ball, or if you can predict in some way, or maybe you see trends happening like you said earlier, COVID made a few changes in terms of how we perceive things, and we got to make sure we still go to our roots and be in person. But are there any other trends or predictions you can make about the future of government relations? And I'm going to throw in the word AI in there because I love talking about AI. Like is AI ever in this picture, or is it no? This is just a human to human kind of thing, and for at least for foreseeable future, AI is not going to be or have much of a role.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. That is a really tough question for me. What is the future of government relations? How does AI play a role in it? I do know that, on one aspect that we are going to have to deal with regard to AI is the validity of the information that's being put out there, right? And so, can AI help counter that? Will AI be responsible for making it worse? I don't know. But one thing I do know about the future of government relations is that the human aspect will never go away. It will never go away. Politics is inherently human. It cannot be replaced by bots. You can influence the public, you can influence the masses with AI, but at the end of the day, the need for human connections will be just as strong, because the problems that we're experiencing are human problems. I don't know how to answer your question, but I do know that I'm not concerned in any way about AI taking my clients away from me, right? And taking my work away from me, and taking over lobbying and advocacy. These are human things that we have to fight to preserve as humans, and not give them up to to robots and AI.
I'm happy to hear that you're confident in that AI is not coming for your job in the near future. Happy to hear that.
It might be wishful thinking, and their AI could be taught to be a better lobbyist than me and to pull data faster and quicker than me. But they don't have the passion that I have. They don't have the passion that you have, Alex, or the passion that all the nonprofits in Canada have to fix problems. They just don't. And maybe I'm an idealist, but I'd rather place my bets on that approach for sure.
Lovely. Puneet, this has been great. A lot of great information. I was hoping that you could share with people how they can reach out with you or to you if they have questions or any kind of follow-ups that they may have.
I'm happy to answer that question, only because a few years ago, I was shocked that when I was creating my website, nobody in Canada had the domain names governmentrelations.ca or governmentfunding.ca. So guess what? I secured both those domains. So, you can go to governmentrelations.ca and you'll see a big picture of my face, and you can contact me through there. My email is puneet.luthra, Puneet Luthra, Luthra at gmail.com. And feel free to reach out to me. What I do is I help nonprofits with their government relations. Some of the nonprofits I work for are a few hours a month. Some are for several hours a month. But in all of those situations, I take over the GR function of the organization. So anyone is welcome to contact me at any time, and I'd be happy to chat with them.
Puneet, thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you so much for doing the hard work that you do.
Thank you, Alex, for the opportunity.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.